In order for one to truly appreciate the significance of what the writers of the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament writings were doing, and how incredibly different the worldview that we find articulated in the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament writings is, one needs to understand the other world, the non-biblical world, the world in which people did not know God, did not have a standard of good and evil, did not see their own lives as the image of God, people who did not have a standard for distinguishing between true and false, people who did not understand that human life had value. We need to enter the darkness. We need to enter what in the first creation story is called the formless, dark void of non biblical thought. It is a very incredible experience for a person to think about his life or her life, to think about the core ideas and values and principles in the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, to think about how he or she understands the value of human life and the value of the life of every person, and then to read carefully, seriously, intensely writings from a world in which there was no consciousness of any of the core ideas that we find in the Bible. That might sound really strange to you. It might sound strange even to academics whom I have found not to be very receptive to the alien character of pagan texts. It's so easy to confront a world that is completely and utterly other, opposed to, opposite to the world in which we live, and to project our own values, our own ideas, our own ideals, our own principles onto this other world. It's much more difficult and it requires much more discipline to restrain ourselves from interpreting a text that is completely other into a language that we understand. It requires much more discipline to let the text speak for itself, to let the text breathe, to let the text articulate the meaning of its own terms, rather than to read a term and to import into the text and import into that term a meaning that that term itself does not have within the text itself. When we do that, when we read a term like human or love or God or evil, and we simply import our own meaning of that term, which is biblical, into the text, rather than letting the text itself articulate the meaning of each of those terms, then we falsify both the text and we falsify our own understanding of those terms. So, what I want to do in the following video series on the non-biblical world, and I'm going to focus on the ancient Greeks, is to let the text speak for itself and to work with the meanings of the terms found in the texts and not to go beyond what the text tells us about the meaning of the terms that is used, are used. So I'm going to maybe say a few words now about the first text that I want to look at, the Iliad, and a few words about the context in which the Iliad was composed. The Iliad is probably the greatest story, the greatest epic poem in the ancient Greek and Roman world, from my standpoint. I haven't found anything that is this blunt and this brilliant in expressing, in articulating the shapes and the colors and the contours of the world it describes. So, Iliad means poem about Ilion. Ilion is the name of an ancient city. This city is also called Ilios or Troy, and you will, in all likelihood, have heard of the Trojan War. So Troy is Ilion or Ilios, and it's a city that is believed to have been located on the west coast of modern-day Turkey, part of a landmass that in the ancient world was known as Asia Minor. It's a coastal city because it's in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And you can look at a map on your computer, or maybe one thing that I can do is just call up a map here to show you where it is. So this is the Aegean Sea. This is mainland Greece. And Ilion is right here, okay? And this is the area of modern-day Turkey. But to close a number of applications. So we know that the poem was composed probably between the years 750 and 600 before the Common Era. When scholars use terms like BCE and CE, they're referring to before the Common Era and Common Era. And these are two ages, and they're two distinct ages. You need to know just very basic terminology in order to be able to understand how historians date things. If I say the Iliad was composed somewhere between 750 and 600 BCE, I'm saying that it was composed about in the 8th century BCE or in the 7th century BCE. Now, century means 100 years. If I speak of the 1st century BCE, I'm speaking of the first block of 100 years before the Common Era, 1 to 100. If I say 2nd century BCE, I'm speaking about the second block of 100 years before the Common Era, somewhere between 101 and 200. If I speak about the 3rd century before the Common Era, I'm speaking about the third block of 100 years between 201 and 300. To say 750 BCE means we're in the middle of the 8th century. And to speak about 650 BCE, I'm speaking about the middle of the 7th century, the 7th block of 100 years. We are living today in the 21st century of the Common Era. We are living in the 21st block of 100 years. We are living in the earlier part of the 21st century. So time, we know, moves forward. And in the Common Era, the higher the number, the more recent that year is to where we currently are. So if I speak about the year 2000, that is more recent than the year 1900. If I speak about the year 1500, that's more recent than the year 1200 in the Common Era. But when we're speaking about the age before the Common Era, the years move not in ascending order, the years move in descending order. So the year 750 before the Common Era is older than the year 600 before the Common Era. The years move downwards. And so if I speak about the year, say, 623 before the Common Era, I'm speaking about the later part of the 7th century before the Common Era, the later part of the 7th block of 100 years. If I speak about 699 BCE, I'm speaking about the beginning of the 7th century, the beginning of the 7th block of 100 years. So the Iliad is a poem that dates to probably around the 8th or 7th centuries BCE. The Iliad is not a novel. It's an ancient poem. It's composed in a metered verse that is called dactylic hexameter. What is dactylic hexameter? You can find a lot of material online about this metered verse. A dactyl means 3 syllables. The first syllable is long, and the second and third syllables are short. Hexa means 6, and meter is a line of verse that has a pattern. So dactylic hexameter is a form of patterned verse where each line has 6 groupings of 3 syllables per group. The first syllable is long, the second and third syllables are short. And there is some variation, but it's minimal. The poem was initially transmitted through song. So it's not like people were writing in the 8th century BCE, the Iliad. People were singing the Iliad. And it's only after actually several hundred years of being transmitted through song that the poem was transmitted in writing. Now, we don't exactly know when the Iliad was written, but we can speak about it being composed. because there was an oral tradition before the written tradition, and the oral tradition was when poems were sung and not written. Now, the Iliad is really about only a few days of the war in Ilion. It's not a story about the Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans. In fact, the word Greeks is not really a meaningful word in the ancient time in which the Iliad was composed, because mainland Greece had individual cities that had their own autonomous rule. And it's not like there was a unified collection of cities that could be called Greece as we speak of it today. They had each city state had its own military, had its own government, and so on. And they were often in conflict with each other. So in the Iliad, you don't actually hear the word Greeks. You hear the word Achaians or Danaans or Argives. And I will mention something more about that later. But really, we're looking in the Iliad at only a few days of the war between the Achaians and the Trojans. There are a few moments where several days pass, but the vast majority of this poem centers only on a few days, because something very critical happened within these few days. And that's where the focus is. And we will work through some of that material. Well, how did the Trojan War begin between the Achaians and the Trojans? To find an answer to this question, we need to say something about ancient Greek myth, because this is where the stories are told that explain how the Trojan War began. What is ancient Greek myth? Well, they are stories. Ancient Greek myth is composed of stories, and the stories are of such a kind that they are connected to other stories, such that it's very hard to discern where something begins and where something ends, because everyone seems to be in some way related to everyone else. I think of it sometimes as I mean, in soap operas, everyone seems to know everyone, and it's hard when there are problems to know exactly who is responsible. Um, so it's more like a spider web, where really you can't locate any first beginnings. So the whole question is, in asking, well, when did things begin? Everything seems to have a prior story, and a story that attaches to other stories. We're not told when events occur in light of a fixed timeline as we orient events today in the modern world according to a calendar. We know of stories about events before the war, and I'm going to tell you one version of a story before the war. So this is the prelude to the Trojan War. Zeus is the most powerful of all the gods in the ancient Greek world. And I will speak about the Greek world from a modern awareness of knowing that in the ancient Greek world, Greece was not a unified country. But Zeus is the most powerful of all the gods, and Zeus learns of a prophecy. He is having an affair with the goddess Thetis, who's a nymph. And Zeus learns of the prophecy that Thetis, his mistress, would give birth to a son who would be more powerful than Zeus. And in the ancient Greek world, the gods are often, if not always, in conflict with one another. Each god desires power, each god desires honor, each god desires what he wants to deny to the other gods. And so there's a struggle for power. And it's a struggle for a power that can't be shared. So, in order for one god to win it, other gods must lose it. And when Zeus learns of this prophecy, he doesn't want the prophecy to come true. So he arranges for his mistress, Thetis, to marry the mortal man, Peleus. And Zeus is aware that if Thetis marries Peleus, then she can't give birth to a son who will be more powerful than him because Peleus is mortal. And Peleus provides the seed. Semen literally means seed. It comes from the word that means seed. And Peleus will supply the seed. And there's no way that that seed would germinate, you can say, into a god that will be more powerful than the king of the gods. Zeus wants to make sure that at the wedding of Thetis and Peleus, there isn't any conflict. And for this reason, he bans the goddess Eris from attending the wedding. Eris means conflict. Eris is the Greek word for strife, conflict, or discord. And when I mention Greek word here, I'm mentioning the Homeric Greek, which is different from the Koine Greek of the first century, which is the language in which the New Testament was written. So I'm speaking in the videos that follow about Homeric Greek, and the videos that follow about the Iliad. So Zeus doesn't invite the goddess Eris to attend the wedding of Thetis and Peleus because he doesn't want conflict there, and conflict is the goddess. However, because Eris has in her nature conflict, because she is conflict, because she expresses herself through conflict, she shows up at the wedding anyway. And at the wedding, Eris rolls a golden apple in the midst of the guests. And inscribed on the apple are to the most beautiful among you, or to the fairest among you. And among the guests are three goddesses: Hera, who is the wife of Zeus; Athena, who is the daughter of Zeus; and Aphrodite, who is also the daughter of Zeus. And each of these goddesses wants the apple for herself. Who is to judge who is the most beautiful goddess? No one wants to be the judge because it's a no-win situation. If you choose one goddess, you will be punished by the other two. So nobody wants to judge. One day, Zeus sends his messenger god, Hermes, to Paris, who is the prince of Troy. He's handsome. He is the son of a king. He has power, and he's very beautiful. And he is told to judge. And he doesn't have a choice. Now, each of the three goddesses attempts to bribe him. Hera offers him Asia, Asia Minor, which is the region around Troy. Athena, who is the virgin goddess of war, she promises him victory in war. And the third goddess, Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love, promises him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, who is both the daughter of Zeus and the queen of Sparta. Thing is, Helen is married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus. Well, Paris has to make a choice, and he chooses Aphrodite as the most beautiful goddess. One day, Paris travels to Sparta, and he visits Menelaus. And Menelaus takes him in as a guest and provides him with the required hospitality and friendship that is given to guests. The ancient Greek word for that hospitality is xenia. And Menelaus must leave. He has to go to Crete, which is a large island south of the mainland. It's not exactly clear what happens after Menelaus left for Crete. What is clear is that Paris and Helen left for Troy together. We don't know if Helen was kidnapped by Paris or if she was abducted. If she was not abducted, if she left, you can say, willingly. Now, willingly, I'm going to put in quotation marks because Aphrodite had promised Helen to Paris. So the whole question of how that could be voluntary, the answer to that question is not at all clear. But whether Helen was possessed by love and went voluntarily with Paris, or whether Paris took her forcibly, is not entirely clear. But we know that both of them left for Troy. When Menelaus returned home to Sparta from Crete, he was just filled with rage when he learned that the queen, his wife, had been stolen. It dishonored him as the king, and we will see that when a man was dishonored, the just response was revenge. And the revenge was to recoup the honor that was stolen. Menelaus had a brother, King Agamemnon. He was the king of a city called Argos, also in the mainland. And Agamemnon and Menelaus assembled a huge army of men from the surrounding city-states in the mainland. Why would warriors from different city-states come to help Menelaus take revenge on Paris for what Paris did when he dishonored him? Well, it's because the kings of these other city-states had sworn an oath. They swore this oath before Menelaus married Helen. And this takes us back to another story. Before Menelaus married Helen, Helen was courted as the most beautiful woman in the world. She was, and daughter of Zeus. She was courted by kings and other leading suitors throughout the region. And among these suitors was Menelaus. And to avoid the inevitable violence from suitors who had sworn to take revenge if they were rejected, because as I mentioned, there was a competitive struggle for honor and power. This certainly was the case among the gods, but maybe I didn't mention this explicitly. It was the case among men. It's no wonder that their vision of the gods was the same, because that's how they lived their lives. that my honor depended on power. And it was part of my value. It constituted a part of my value. And when I was dishonored, or if I was wanted to marry a woman and I lost in that bid to marry the woman and somebody else married her, I would have been dishonored. I will say a lot more about the meaning of honor in the Iliad, but all of the suitors, when they wanted to marry Helen, they had sworn revenge if their honor was taken from them, i.e., if they lost in their bid. And the husband of Helen's mother, the acting father, and I won't go into the distinction between the father of Helen as Zeus and the acting father, that refers to another story. But Helen's acting father, Tyndareus, had made each suitor swear an oath that whoever won Helen in the bid to marry her, that man would have support of all the other kings who also wanted to marry her. And they all swore an oath that if anyone ever lost Helen to anybody else, she was carried off somewhere else, then they would support the husband of Helen in taking revenge. And taking revenge meant sacking the city. To sack the city means to go into the city that has dishonored you, to, in this case, that has dishonored you, to kill the men, to rape the women, to carry off all the spoils, anything of value, which would involve the women and some children. Other children would be killed. Male children probably would be killed. And to take all the spoils and then to burn the city to the ground. And it's because Helen's suitors had sworn this oath that Agamemnon and Menelaus were able to assemble an armada of more than 1,000 ships. In the Iliad, actually, the exact number given when you go through the catalog of ships is 1,186. And all of these ships were gathered together to sail across the Aegean Sea and sack Troy, in the mission to sack Troy. So why did the Achaians go to Troy? They didn't go so much to take back Helen as it was to make the Trojans pay for what the prince did to the king of Sparta, Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon. And that payment, that retaliation, that just revenge took the form of sacking the city. The mission involved massacring the men. There might be some men who were spared, but they would be ransomed for treasures. So there are moments in the Iliad where a man was captured, he was about to be killed. And he made a promise that, oh, if you spare me, I will. My father will give you all this gold and all this silver and all this bronze and just spare my life. And there are references to moments where men were spared. In the Iliad, the men are killed. I can't offhand remember any moment where somebody is spared. But men who were spared would be ransomed. But most men would be, if not all men, would be massacred. The women and children would be enslaved. Women would be raped and taken as spoils of war. Some male children would be killed. Now, to be taken as a spoil of war, to be taken as a slave, to be taken as property, meant that you didn't have any rights, you didn't have any say. You were carried off to the homeland of your of the one who had sacked everything, who had sacked your city and taken away everything that you have ever loved. You are now the possession of that man. It's a very, very unthinkable lot for the life of a woman who was taken as a spoil of war. The city would be plundered, as I mentioned, of anything of value, all of its treasures, which involved gold, it involved things, it involved um, people, it involved anything of value. And then the city would be burned to the ground so that really it was uninhabitable. The Iliad, it sounds like this, it is the story of Ilion or the poem of Ilion, but it's not really about 10-year war. It's about only a few days, again, of the 10th year of this war. It begins when something very, very critical happens that will shape the course of the entire poem. That happens in the first of 24 books. And that's where I'm going to turn to in my next video. My name is Mohammed Kimji. If you would like to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your time.